The fathers in spirit want me to tell the sons that they came from a different time and a different culture, and so they couldn't express their love in the way we do these days. So I had to play that song today for our speaker, Reverend Keith Norton, because not only is he a great dad building on the traditions of his own father, but he's going to be a great banjo player sometime soon. For as far back as he can remember, Reverend Keith has had a connection to the spirit world. Some of his earliest memories as a child include seeing and hearing people that were from the beyond. Some people call them ghosts or spirits, but to him, it was just a normal part of life. It was these experiences that made Reverend Keith want to learn more about this unseen world. As a young child, he used to spend hours reading every book he could find on the spirit world, and the more he read, the more fascinated he became in learning about the spirit world, including mediumship and spiritualism. For many years, Reverend Keith was in search of a church that felt right, and once he entered the sanctuary at the Center of Enlightenment in 2006, he knew that this was the place for him. Over the years, he served on the board of directors in many roles as trustee, vice president, and president. The Center of Enlightenment has always been a special place to his family, so it felt right when he and his beautiful wife Fiona were married in this very church on October 3rd, 2009. In February 2016, he was ordained as a minister at the Center of Enlightenment, and in February 2020, he was appointed as senior minister by Reverend Ken Nowaczewski. Please welcome Reverend Keith Norton.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you, Reverend David.
You're welcome.
So today is a magical day. It's not only Father's Day, but it's a solstice. And I happened to be on Facebook this morning, and Patty had shared this thing on a meme that says, today the sun moves into Cancer in astrology. It's about connecting with those that we care about and building emotional bonds through those connections. It's also a month of healing by clearing out negative patterns that may be blocking our growth. And I thought that was very appropriate for today, because today's sermon is about forgiveness. And also the time of the solstice is a time of reflection. So the topic of forgiveness is such an extremely broad subject, so I've tried to narrow it down into 3 simple ideas. The first is the most important, that's forgiving yourself. The second is asking for forgiveness. That's a tough one. And the third is forgiving others. So part 1, forgiving yourself first. This step is the most important, for if you can't forgive yourself, you won't be able to forgive your others. A Course in Miracles says all forgiveness is a gift to yourself. We talk about it in our abundance principles. Number 3, I forgive myself for perceived wrongdoings in thought, action, deed, and intention. Frederick Luskin, PhD, director of the Stanford University Forgiveness Project, readily admits that forgiveness, like love, can't be forced. You can't just will forgiveness, said Luskin, author of Forgive for Good, a proven prescription for health and happiness. What I teach is that you can create conditions where forgiveness is most likely to occur. There are specific practices we offer that diminish hostility and self-pity and increase positive emotions, so it becomes more likely that a genuine, heartfelt release of resentment will occur. For example, Luskin encourages the practice of gratitude, the active effort to acknowledge what's good in your life. Gratitude is simply focusing your attention on the positive things that have happened, he says. That creates a biochemical experience that makes it more likely that forgiveness will occur. Stress management, whether through meditation, deep breathing, or relaxation exercises, also helps quell the stress of anger and resentment, he says. So does cognitive reframing, which fosters acceptance of the facts of your situation. Finally, Luskin encourages people to change the story to tell themselves, so they appear more like survivors who are hopeful about the future rather than victims with a grievance. You can't change, or you can change. I hate my mother because she didn't love me, to Life is a real challenge for me because I didn't feel loved as a child, Luskin says. That makes forgiveness so much more possible. There's two types of forgiveness. Everett L. Worthington, Jr., PhD, a professor of psychology at Virginia Commonwealth University, and the author of Forgiveness and Reconciliation, Theory and Application, divides forgiveness into two types. Number one is decisional forgiveness. Decisional forgiveness involves choosing to let go of angry thoughts about the person who you feel has wronged you. You can tell yourself, I'm not going to seek revenge, for example, or I am going to avoid that person, Worthington says. You could choose decisional forgiveness and still have a lot of emotional unforgiveness. Emotional forgiveness, the ultimate goal, however, is emotional forgiveness in which negative emotions such as resentment, bitterness, hostility, hatred, anger, and fear are replaced with love, compassion, sympathy, and empathy. Emotional forgiveness is where the health action is, says Worthington. Emotional unforgiveness causes a chronic stress response, which results in obsessing about the wrong done to you. Rumination is what gets people into trouble. Rumination is the mental health bad boy. It is associated with everything bad in the mental health field: obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety, depression, and probably hives. What if you're not able to forgive? Well, that's okay too, according to Gene Safer, PhD, a psychotherapist and the author of Forgiving and Not Forgiving. For some of our patients, recognizing that they don't have to forgive is a huge relief in itself. Many don't have to forgive in order to resolve about their feelings, Safer says. They say, I can never feel okay about these terrible things, but I'm not going to be vengeful. And Bill Cosby is quoted as saying, people can be more forgiving than they can imagine. But if you have to forgive yourself first, let go of what's bitter and move on. While writing this sermon today, I received a message from President Lincoln, who is one of my spirit guides. And that message is, let go of guilt. There's a reason you made that choice. Part two, asking for forgiveness. So part 2 and 3, the asking for forgiveness and forgiving others kind of goes hand in hand. And there's a story I want to share, and I have the book, and it's called Amish Peace. And I found it a few years ago in the Amish country while down there with my mom. And in a nutshell, I'm going to summarize the story here because it's like 4 or 5 pages, so I don't want to read it verbatim. But basically, so there's this main character in this story named Joel. He's a 17-year-old, just got his license, got the fast car, driving on the country roads in rural Ohio. And guess what? Gets stuck behind an Amish buggy. And if you've ever been to the Amish country, it's very hard to pass on some of these because it's very hilly, very curvy. So, he's getting impatient, and wants to go really fast. And so he decides he's going to try and pass this buggy. Well, lo and behold, the buggy turns left in front of him, and he hits the buggy and kills the young couple that's in this buggy. So the story goes on where it turns out that in the Amish community, when a couple is recently married, they take the buggy and they go to their families that aren't able to attend the ceremony and visit and spend a day visiting different family members. So that's what happened. They had just been married. They were on their way to the next family to visit. So Joel's really upset about this. I mean, he's 17 years old. He's possibly facing this criminal case and, this tragedy because he got so impatient and he's just beating himself up. Like, if I only had waited and, things would have been much different. So his mom convinces him to basically go to the funeral of these young couple and ask the family for forgiveness. So Joel goes to this funeral and meets with the family, the mother and father of this young couple, and asks for their forgiveness and what happened. And it turns out that the family of the young couple had actually said, we forgive you, and we are grateful that you would come to us for asking for forgiveness because now we can start the healing process. In the Amish community, that's big. So as the story goes on, what we find out is not only did the family forgive them, but The Amish family had taken him in, invited him to family dinners. He became part of their family, and they even attended his own wedding when Joel got married. Just because he had asked the family for forgiveness and they were able to heal, and so they reconciled and became very close. And that story blew my mind. I mean, I couldn't imagine going to, having that and being in that situation and having to go there and ask for forgiveness. And I can't think about how difficult it must have been for Joel to gather the courage to show up at the viewing and face the family after such a tragedy. But by doing so, it forever changed their lives. So part 3, forgiving others. I'll take a moment to reflect on the family's reaction to Joel attending the viewing. For the Amish family, Joel's attending the viewing allowed them to start the healing process. And how powerful is it the Amish family befriended him after what they went through? And what I came up with was 2 families, 1 tragedy, an incredibly powerful lesson in forgiveness. And so for as long as I can remember, as I said, I've been a huge fan of President Lincoln, and he's also one of my spirit guides, but I envy this man so much that, and when I'm in a situation where I need assistance or need to figure out what to do, I ask, how would President Lincoln handle this? And the thing I most respect about him is that he spent countless hours looking for reasons to forgive soldiers who were about to be court-martialed rather than just signing the papers. And so I want to share a couple quick stories, and it's from a book called Abraham Lincoln's Daily Treasure, and it's based on a devotional book that Abraham Lincoln used during the Civil War called The Believer's Daily Treasure, included short stories about Mr. Lincoln that are motivational and inspirational. And the first story is called Acts of Mercy, and it demonstrates the acts of being merciful and forgiving others. So Secretary of State Leonard Swett once told a story about Abraham Lincoln's sympathetic and caring personality. I remember one day being in his room when Lincoln was sitting at his table with a huge pile of papers before him. And after a pleasant talk, he turned quite abruptly and said, "Get out of my way, Swett. Tomorrow is Butcher Day, and I must go through these papers and see if I cannot forgive or find some excuse to let these poor fellows off." The pile of papers he had in hand were the records of the court-martials of men who on the following day were to be shot. Instead of doing the easy things, just signing the papers, Lincoln was prepared to sift through each one to find ways to save lives of those, as many as possible. Now, do you work on being merciful, or is it something that just happens every once in a while? Lincoln worked at it because he knew that if he didn't, nobody else would. And the second story is called Giving a Second Chance. And it's another short story about being able to give and willing to give a second chance when most people wouldn't be willing to do so. Given the responsibility to decide the fate of a court-martialed soldier, would you be willing to give a second chance? As commander-in-chief, Lincoln was ultimately the one to decide whether or not a young soldier would live or die. Often the convicted soldier would not be much older than a child, not even 18 years old. At the behest of some of his young generals, Lincoln stood firm in the desire to give the younger men a second chance. "I am unwilling for any boy under 18 to be shot," he demanded. These young men, according to Lincoln, deserved a lesson by which to live and not die. Many of them ultimately became good husbands and fathers, and some of them even became great military leaders. Lincoln's forgiving attitude gave them the chance to begin again. Do you help other people start over, or are you eager to put an end to them? And I actually read one story where there was a 12-year-old boy who was actually a lot of 12-year-olds or a little bit older would sign up and be the drummers for the marching troops. And there was actually a young boy who was going to be court-martialed and shot the next day who was 14. And he actually signed that paperwork saying, he's a 12-year-old. What is a 12-year-old going to do in the battle? He's going to run away. Well, he was being charged with court-martial for abandonment because, I can't imagine being in battle at 14. But take a moment to look around, and as you do so, think about how many of us had ancestors that possibly fought in the Civil War. And perhaps, maybe there's 1 or 2 of us whose ancestor might have been one of those that Mr. Lincoln forgave, sparing their lives forever. Think about how life would be different. Forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves. Forgiveness opens the door to abundance and prosperity. Without forgiveness for ourselves and for others, we would not be able to go forward on our journey or spirituality. Forgiveness is a key to our spiritual development and as well for our mental well-being. Forgiveness is a choice. We all need forgiveness at one time or another in our lives because we are human and therefore are fallible. Forgiveness is a release from the burden of anger and pain. When you choose to forgive, you choose to live in the present and the future instead of the past. That's pretty powerful. I want to read that again. When you choose to forgive, you live to live in the present and the future instead of the past. It does not mean you forget. It just means you are choosing to release the burden and move on in life. Forgiveness doesn't happen on its own. Again, it's a choice. You must choose to forgive. When our life is not going the way we would hope or wish for, it can be a sign that there is some overlooked forgiveness that needs to take place before we can start attracting our wants and desires. Sometimes when we have low self-esteem or when we feel stuck in our grief, there's overlooked forgiveness that needs to take place to allow for more forward momentum. Forgiveness for ourselves and for others opens the path for abundance in all areas of our life. In closing today, I will leave you with a quote from Mahatma Gandhi. And the quote is, "The weak can never forget, the weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is the attitude of the strong." And I'm wishing all the fathers out there a happy Father Day, and to all, many solstice blessings. Namaste. Thank you for listening.